Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to go over one of my favorite genres, and that is historical fiction. Okay, so I'm going to start out with all of the historical fiction that I have actually read, and I'm going to try my best to categorize this. I have a whole list, so I'm not going to be able to read the backs of all of them, but I will read the backs of ones that I have not read to just kind of give you an idea. Some of these books I've read quite some time ago, so I'm going to pull from my memory as best I can, but they are ones that have stuck with me and ones that I would still highly recommend to anybody wanting to try historical fiction. So historical fiction, if you don't know me very well, is a genre that I have loved since I was a kid. I have read it all throughout growing up and till now. I started out reading the diary series I'll put up here of each person writes like a diary in a different historical time, and you kind of follow along with them, and my favorite was obviously the Titanic. I have always loved the story of the Titanic, obviously not the tragedy of it, but I've just found it fascinating to read about it, as well as World War II and the slavery period and the Holocaust period. I've always wanted to learn more about it and read stories from it. And so it started out with that, and then I just kind of grew from there, wanting to try out some different historical time periods such as the Great Depression. And so quickly historical fiction became one of my favorite genres. So until I actually got into fantasy, which is now my favorite genre, this was all I read was historical fiction. That was it. So I have a list that I've kind of accumulated over the years that I still recommend, and I hope that you can find one that you love as well. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is going to be Kristin Hannah, and that is because Kristin Hannah is someone that I'm very familiar with, someone that I've read a lot of books from, and I'm sure that you have heard about her as well. So I'll try not to spend too long on her because she is someone that's already pretty well known, but I actually read The Nightingale as my first Kristin Hannah, and this was probably 4-ish years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, and it was my first book by her. I absolutely fell in love with her as an author. This is still my favorite historical fiction book of all time. I do want to reread it again soon, and it is one that I recommend to every single person that I know. And it follows the French perspective of the tragedies that kind of went along with World War II, and also a female perspective, and she is a spy and helps to basically get some American pilots and help them across the borders, and just kind of does a lot of things to help out in the war to fight against the Holocaust. So it is a really, really great read. It is of course sad, but it is something that I think everyone should read at least once. Then my second favorite Kristin Hannah book is The Four Winds, and this is a Great Depression story, and it follows Elsa, and she ends up having a child and then going through the Great Depression, and has like trial after trial, and the Great Dust Bowl, which I actually didn't know about the Dust Bowl at all. During the Great Depression, that was a huge thing that was going on in addition to that, and I had no idea. I just wasn't really paying attention, or I don't know, I just didn't remember or know about that part. So this goes into a lot of that, where they are struggling with farming, and they're struggling with weather, and they're struggling with sickness, and then obviously poverty. So then they attempt to travel and find somewhere else that will make more money, that will be safer to live, and there's just some even more trials that come along with that, and great poverty. So I highly recommend that you read this one. This would be my favorite thus far as like the Great Depression historical fictions go. This is the best one that I have read so far, but I do want to read more in that time period. The next Kristin Hannah book that I highly recommend is Homefront. This book is following a family that has to send his wife off to war, and there's a lot of controversy obviously because she's a woman, and he just finds that strange. And so there's a lot of disagreements and family dynamics that are woven throughout this, and the struggles that he really had with that, as well as her, and just marital issues. So if there are any triggers for divorce or just any marital kind of problems, then I would probably not read this. But I think that showing family dynamics and what could happen when someone is deployed is really important for us to be able to sympathize with those people in military families, but also during this time period when it was frowned upon to be a woman in the military. I just think it really helps open your eyes, and also is just a beautiful representation of family struggles and how to go about fixing them. Okay, so some of these I don't have with me. The Winter Garden by Kristin Hannah, that is my next favorite Kristin Hannah. And this one is following, I believe, a Russian woman. And honestly, I don't remember a ton about this. I do remember really loving it though. And I think that it is following when she went through trying to get across the border during war. And so she starts trying to tell her kids why she is the way that she is and the struggles that she went through. And it's just really emotional. It's a really emotional read. And the next one I would recommend is The Woman, which I'm sure you've all heard about. That's her most recent, her most popular right now. It's a Vietnam War book, and it follows a woman going into the Vietnam War as a nurse and all the struggles that go along with that. It is very good. It's not my favorite of hers just because I felt like there were so many things happening right after another that it kind of made it a little unbelievable because she was going through like so many things. But other than that, I gave it 4 stars, and I really did love the book. And the next book that I read by her was The Great Alone. This is a very popular one of hers, a lot of people's favorites. This is my lowest rated one of Kristin Hannah's. I gave it 3 stars. And that is just because I felt it was too long. The story was really good. It follows this family moving out to Alaska to try to make like a home there. And I believe this is also during the Great Depression period, but I'm not quite sure. I'll correct myself here. And I just didn't love it because the middle portion I felt like had a lot of filler and wasn't necessary, and it just drug on and on and on. So for those reasons, I gave it 3 stars. And then the last Kristin Hannah I read is Firefly Lane. I gave this one 3 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is a friendship historical fiction, and it is basically following them as they grow up and all the trials they go through. And it is kind of like an unhealthy friendship dynamic, but it is definitely a tearjerker and one that I would recommend everyone try and read. It is very, very popular. Okay, so the next ones that I've read were Christian historical fiction. Lynn Austen is my favorite Christian historical fiction author. And I first started out reading Candle in Darkness, which is the first in this series. And this is following a girl who, her dad is fighting in the war to keep slavery. And she has slaves in her home, but she is very much against it. And then she falls in love with a man who is also for slavery. And so it basically follows along her trying to basically use the word and fight for what's right and do some things undercover and even go against the people that she loves who are fighting in war to do what she believes is right and what God's telling her. It is absolutely beautiful. I have read this at least 3 times in my lifetime. I read it first when I was a teenager, and it is an incredible story. I highly recommend reading this and the entire series. So the next one is following a slave, and then this one follows a nurse who goes into the war. And I believe that there is romance in all of them, and it is just a spectacular series. So I did read another Lynn Austen, which was Chasing Shadows. I gave this one 3 stars. It was good. I didn't love it as much as these, but I still really enjoyed that one. And I believe that's all I have for the Christian historical fiction. But there's obviously lots out there. So then historical fantasy I would suggest are The Lost Apothecary. This was a really interesting story, a different take on fantasy that I have never read, and it's following 2 different time periods where there is someone who basically makes herbal remedies and just different things to help women get rid of men that are hostile and abusive. And she basically works undercover to help these women to become free from that, because it was frowned upon and you were kind of really stuck in that time period. And so it follows this girl going back in that area and trying to figure out what happened to this person. And as she's doing that, it follows the stories of the women that were involved in that and what happened along the way. I really loved it. I believe I gave this 4 stars. And the next one is The Sorceress Comes To Call. I just recently read this one. I gave it 4 stars. This was a really great historical fantasy. It's historical because of just the time period. It is very older times, the way they talk, the way they dress, and all of that. It's just basically the setting that is more historical. And you can tell it is like a classic because it is a retelling of a classic. And so it definitely reads a bit older and slower, but I really, really enjoyed it. A couple more historicals that I've read. Historical romance genre, I've read Victoria. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this 3 stars, and this is obviously following Queen Victoria. I actually think I binged this one. It was really, really good. I gave it 3 stars just simply because I've read better historical fictions, but as far as historical romance goes, this was a really great one. And then Bridgerton series, I went ahead and put that on here. I've only read like 2 of them, but basically it's just the setting, the time period makes this historical. I enjoyed the first 2, but I kind of quit after that because it was getting a little repetitive for me, but this may be something that you might really enjoy if you love historical romance. And then the next one I have listed for historical romance is the Outlander series. I have actually not read the books, but I have watched the show and absolutely adored it. It's probably one of my top favorite shows of all time. There are tons of trigger warnings, so make sure you look them up. It's very heavy. There's a lot of stuff in the shows I had to fast forward. I could not watch. But I would like to get to reading the books at some point because I'm sure they're better. So that lists off all the stuff that I have read. So now I'm going to break it up into categories and go over the books that I have not read but I want to read and that I would suggest. So I'll go over classics first, and that would be Gone with the Wind. Obviously this is a historical fiction. I believe it's Civil War. And the prejudice, there's a lot of prejudice in here and just different things like that are obviously not okay today. So go in there knowing that a lot of the ideas in this book are outdated and incorrect, but this is a classic for a reason, and I do want to get to this eventually. I just think that it's going to be a really, really great read. It's just a really large commitment that it's going to take me a minute to get to. And then I don't know why I didn't bring it down here, but Pride and Prejudice I would recommend, as well as Little Women, basically just because of the time period settings that they take place in would make them more historical. So I forgot to mention these. These are 2 that I actually read. I'm sorry. These are 2 that I read. Kate Quinn is another great historical fiction author. I would just go in knowing that she does have a lot more vulgar language in her books, so that is one thing that I don't love about her writing style. And then sometimes she can get overly detailed in some of her books, and so she's not a favorite of mine because there are some of hers that I've actually had to DNF for those reasons. They just became way too boring. And the 2 that I DNF'd were the Briar Club, and then the other one that I DNF'd was, it is just slipping my mind. I will put a picture up here, but there is another one that I DNF'd of hers because it was just way overly detailed. Oh, Diamond Dye. It was Diamond Dye, and I couldn't get through it. It was just too boring for me. But the 2 that I have read and loved by her were The Rose Code and The Alice Network. The Rose Code is basically following a group of people that were spies, basically trying to break code the entire time during the war to help them fight in the war. And it is so, so good. And then the other one would be The Alice Network. And I can't remember all the details of this one, but I think there's 2 different perspectives. But this is just another one of hers that I remember really enjoying. And then another one that I've read is Night by Eli Wiesel. I highly recommend this one. It's very short. It's very sad, so go into it knowing that, but it is a really great read that I think everyone should read at least once. Oh, and then a short story, historical fiction that I read that I really enjoyed was The Forgotten Chapter. Highly recommend that one. It's super short audio, and I thought it was really great. I have another one that I've read. My first middle grade historical fiction was Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. I highly recommend reading this, and this follows basically a girl who is pen pals with someone in the Vietnam War, as well as pen pals with an older man who used to fight in the war, and she's going back and forth with him the whole time in letters. It is so good, it is so emotional, it is such a fast read. I highly recommend it. It is really, really a great story. Okay, and then the next ones that I would say historical fantasy genre would be The Lovely War. I highly recommend reading this one. This is one that I have on my list for next month, and I've heard nothing but great things about this one. And says, does love conquer war? The answer is never in doubt, but it's a pleasure to have it confirmed by a celestially inspired storyteller. In the perilous days of World War I and II, the gods helped the fates and the hearts of fate for mortals in their hands. Hazel, James, Aubrey, and Colette, a classical pianist from London, a British would-be architect turned soldier, a Halem-born ragtime genius in the U.S. Army, and a Belgian orphan with a gorgeous voice and a devastating past, their story as told by goddess Aphrodite who must spin the tale or face judgment on Mount Olympus, filled with hope and heartbreak, prejudice and passion, and reveals that through war, in a formidable force, it's no match for the translucent power of love. So I am so excited to read this. I have heard nothing but good things. I also forgot to mention Divine Rivals. I did read this one. This is a historical setting type romance book, and they basically have magical typewriters, and there is a war going on, and it is absolutely beautiful and poetic. Highly recommend reading this. Another historical fantasy that I would recommend is The Lost Story. I have not read this one, but it is a very popular one right now, and this is a kind of a reimagining of Narnia. So I've heard a lot of great things about that one. Okay, so another historical fiction that I want to read is The Lilac Girls. This has really great reviews on Goodreads, and it is based on a real-life story of a New York socialite who is championed a group of concentration camp survivors known as the Rabbits. This acclaimed debut novel reveals a story of love, redemption, and terrible secrets that were hidden for decades. Caroline Faraday is a former Broadway actress and liaison to the French consulate whose life is forever changed when Hitler's army invades Poland in September 1939 and then sets its sights on France. An ocean away from Caroline, Kasia Kazmarek, a Polish teenager, sinks deeper into her role as a courier for the underground resistance movement in Germany. Herta, a young doctor, answers an aide for a government medical position only to find herself trapped in a male-dominated realm of Nazi secrets and power. The lives of these three women are set on a collision course when the unthinkable happens and Kasia is sent to Ravensbrück, the notorious Nazi concentration camp for women. Their stories cross continents as Caroline and Kasia strive to bring justice to those whom history has forgotten. The next book that is historical fiction that I would like to read is Stephen King. This is, I think, his only historical fiction. 11/22/63, I believe, is following the nation of President Kennedy. So I've heard that this is a really loved book, and it is also a huge commitment. Then I just went over this one in my last video, but Demon Copperhead won the Pulitzer Prize, and it is following a family that is struggling in poverty and drug addiction in the Appalachian areas. So it is something that I definitely want to get to. Another one is The Tattooish of Auschwitz. This one is a movie, I believe, and it's definitely one that I want to get to and one that is highly, highly rated. The next one that I would like to get to is Beneath a Scarlet Sky. I don't know that this is a favorite of everyone's, but it follows in World War II in Italy. So I have not read a perspective in Italy, so I think that this is going to be really different for me, but it's Pino Lilla wants nothing to do with the war of the Nazis. He's a normal Italian teenager obsessed with music, food, and girls, but his days of innocence are numbered. When his family home in Milan is destroyed by Allied bombs, Pino joins an underground railroad helping Jews escape over the Alps, and falls for Anna, a beautiful widow 6 years his senior. In an attempt to protect him, Pino's parents force him to enlist as a German soldier, a move they think will keep him out of combat. But after Pino is injured, he is recruited at the tender age of 18 to become the personal driver for Adolf Hitler's left hand in Italy, General Hans Leyers, one of the third most mysterious and powerful commanders. Now, with the opportunity to spy for the Allies inside the German high command, Pino endures the horrors of the war and the Nazi occupation by fighting in secret, his courage bolstered by his love for Anna and for his life he dreams they will one day share. I just think this sounds like an incredible World War II story. I've heard so many people talking about this one recently. This is one I picked up a while ago, The Frozen River. It is following a midwife, and in 1789 in Maine, it says, from the best-selling author of I Was Anastasia and codename Helena comes a gripping historical mystery inspired by the life and diary of Martha Ballard, a renowned 18th century midwife who defied the legal system and wrote herself into American history. Everyone has been loving this one, but I am saving this one for the winter time, obviously. So this is one that I have had my eye on for quite some time. And I believe that wraps up everything that I have on here, but I am sure there are so many more that I'm forgetting or missing or have on my list of want to read. But I just wanted to make a compiled list and a video for you all to refer back to of ones that I have read and what I thought, and ones that I want to read that I've heard great things about. I hope you're able to find a historical fiction recommendation on this list. And if you have one that's not on this list that you absolutely loved, please leave a comment below and let me know so that I can add it to my long TBR list. And until next time, guys, remember to read what inspires you. Bye, friends.